The time it happened, everything appeared normal, until the unthinkable shattered that normalcy. It was a night like any other in the city, a humid, restless evening with neon reflections dancing off rain-slicked sidewalks. But what unfolded on that quiet stretch of pavement would soon transform the ordinary into an extraordinary tale of tension, mistaken identity, and power. At precisely 8:47 p.m., a call crackled over dispatch. A suspicious individual had been observed walking alone down a typically safe neighborhood street. No prior incidents, no overtly dangerous behavior, just the sight of a black man, well-dressed and composed, making his solitary way home. Yet the dispatch tone carried an unspoken urgency. Officers already on duty were primed for a routine check. A lone patrol car cruised the dimly lit street. Its occupants, eyes alert behind darkened glasses, noted the man's deliberate gait and crisp attire. Something about the scene felt unusual. The quiet determination of the stranger clashed with the simmering tension in the city. Within moments, a second, and then a third squad car rolled in, their red and blue lights painting the pavement with erratic bursts of color. Without warning, the first officer, his voice tight with a mix of authority and apprehension, shouted, "Sir, hands where we can see them!" He stepped out of the car, his hand inching towards his holster, expecting a threat. The man, however, merely paused, his expression a blend of weary resignation and subtle defiance. "Where you headed?" the officer demanded, his tone laced with suspicion that betrayed more than just protocol. "Home," the man replied, his voice measured. A brief silence followed, heavy with the unsaid. "You live around here?" the officer pressed, as though the answer might justify their escalating presence. "Yes," came the calm retort. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The scene, while seemingly innocuous, was suddenly charged with an undercurrent of something deeper, an inexplicable discord between what was seen and what was expected. The lead officer, unable to reconcile his preconceptions with the man's quiet dignity, demanded ID. Reluctantly, the man, who had carried the weight of this routine confrontation many times before, reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a slim, worn leather wallet. He flipped it open with deliberate slowness. In that suspended moment, the officer's anticipation morphed into palpable tension. The lead officer snatched the ID, scanning it with a practiced eye that then faltered. His voice dropped to a whisper as he muttered, "Judge Nathaniel Reeves." For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. The officer's expressions shifted from hardened suspicion to sheer disbelief. A judge, a figure of authority and respect, stood before them. Their stance wavered, their hands trembled ever so slightly. The gravity of the revelation struck them as a personal affront to the principles they were meant to embody. "What did you say?" the officer managed, his voice cracking under the weight of the revelation. Judge Reeves's eyes, steely and unyielding, met theirs. "I said I'm heading home," he repeated evenly. At that moment, an unspoken truth hung in the air, a truth that the layers of authority and prejudice had collapsed into one unspeakable irony. The officers, caught between protocol and the unexpected presence of a man whose identity demanded respect, were paralyzed. As the situation unfolded, one officer discreetly tapped his radio. The static-filled response that followed wasn't a call for immediate backup. No, it was something altogether different. In that terse exchange, a cover-up was being orchestrated. Hidden behind official communications, the seeds of a planned silence were sown. Judge Reeves, noticing the furtive movements, felt a surge of alarm. It wasn't merely an instance of mistaken identity. It was a collision of worlds, of law enforcement's rigid expectations, and a man who embodied both the struggles of his race and the weight of the law he upheld. His eyes darted between the officers, his mind racing through memories of countless similar encounters, where the color of his skin preceded his achievements and reputation. For years, he had built a life defined by justice and integrity, a jurist whose decisions shaped the lives of many. Yet, on this fateful night, he found himself stripped of his dignity, reduced to a stereotype by those sworn to protect. His mind recalled the whispers in the corridors of the courthouse and the unspoken criticisms that followed him even in moments of triumph. And now, here he was, a judge caught in a moment of injustice at the hands of those who should have revered him. The patrol car's interior crackled with tension. One of the younger officers shifted nervously, breaking the silence with a halting question. "Judge, why didn't you speak up sooner?" The question cut deep. Judge Reeves's voice, though calm, carried the weight of a lifetime's experience. "I've learned that sometimes silence can speak louder than words," he replied, his tone hinting at secrets of a troubled past and decisions made in the name of preserving peace. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of the scene, a shadow moved, a figure who had been watching from a distance. Clad in a dark coat, this observer was no ordinary bystander. His eyes flickered with recognition, and his expression betrayed a complex mix of admiration and caution. He had been following Judge Reeves for reasons known only to himself. Tonight, it seemed, fate had drawn his path directly into the unfolding drama. As the officers struggled with their internal conflict, the lead officer's phone buzzed. A curt message flashed across the screen. "Secure the scene. Do not engage further until instructed." The words were a command wrapped in bureaucratic finality, one that left the officers in a state of suspended action. They exchanged glances that spoke of confusion, fear, and a dawning realization that the situation was spiraling beyond their control. Judge Reeves, still standing firm despite the uncertainty, saw an opportunity amidst the chaos. "If you have any questions," he said evenly, "I suggest you ask them now. I won't be staying to debate." His words were both a challenge and an invitation, a reminder that he was not merely a subject to be scrutinized, but a man with his own agency and authority. But before any answer could be formed, a distant siren wailed, a sound that grew louder, echoing off nearby buildings. The officers tensed. The previously hushed atmosphere exploded into frantic energy. The unexpected sound was not part of their plan. It signaled the arrival of an unseen force, one that might hold the key to unraveling the tangled web of orders and orders not followed. In the ensuing moments, a series of shocking inconsistencies emerged. One officer's radio, instead of broadcasting standard updates, began relaying fragmented orders that seemed to contradict one another. "Stand down," it repeated over and over. Yet, in another channel, urgent instructions to detain the suspect, now the judge, echoed. The duality of commands left the officers in limbo, trapped between duty and morality. Judge Reeves observed this digital tug-of-war with a mix of skepticism and resolve. His mind raced back to the countless cases he had presided over, cases where the truth was manipulated, where justice was subverted by hidden agendas. Tonight, the very fabric of law enforcement was being tested, and he could no longer stand on the sidelines. "What's going on?" a voice demanded from behind him. Turning, Reeves saw the shadowed figure from earlier step forward. His presence was both ominous and strangely reassuring. "I believe this is just the beginning," the stranger said quietly, his tone laced with secrets and unspoken promises. "There are forces at work tonight that go far beyond what meets the eye." The judge's eyes narrowed. He had trusted his intuition long enough to know that a single event could unravel a series of hidden truths. "Explain," he said, his voice firm despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. The man stepped closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "There's a network, deep within the system. Orders that are meant to keep us all in line, even when the law itself is in question. Your case tonight, it's not random. It's a calculated move by those who fear transparency. A chill ran down Reeves's spine. He realized that what began as a seemingly straightforward encounter was a microcosm of a larger battle, a struggle for accountability and truth in a world where power could corrupt even the most sacred institutions. The officers, meanwhile, remained ensnared in their own internal gridlock, their faces contorted with uncertainty as they absorbed the implications of the unfolding drama. Before the stranger could continue, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the street. A high-ranking official, unmistakably draped in the insignia of the very department meant to uphold the law, strode into view. His eyes darted between the judge and the officers, and a cold smile crept across his face. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his tone syrupy sweet, yet undercut with a steely authority that left no room for negotiation. The judge, caught in the crossfire of conflicting loyalties, squared his shoulders. "I was simply on my way home," he stated, voice unwavering. "But it appears my identity has raised more questions than answers." The official's gaze hardened. "Identity is everything," he replied curtly, his eyes scanning the scene as if cataloging each detail for a report that might be used to justify future actions. "And tonight, that identity seems to be a liability." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered officers, but not all were convinced. In the background, a young officer's eyes glistened with doubt, a silent plea for fairness that hung heavy in the charged air. The official's next words sliced through the mounting tension. "I order all units to secure the area. No further questioning until my team has arrived." His voice brooked no argument, and for a moment, the street was swallowed by an oppressive silence. Yet, as the judge absorbed the official's command, his mind was already racing ahead. Who was behind these orders? What did the clandestine network entail? And why had he, a man of the law, been ensnared in this elaborate web of control? His heart pounded as he considered the broader implications. A case that was about to become much more than a single encounter on a quiet street. The shadowed observer, now partially illuminated by the wavering streetlights, leaned in and whispered, "This isn't over, Judge Reeves. Not by a long shot. The next move will force your hand and mine, and when it does, the truth will finally come to light." As the heavy footsteps receded and the high-ranking official retreated with his reinforcements, the judge and the few remaining officers stood alone amidst the chaos. The chill of the night deepened as unresolved questions loomed large. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next act in a drama that promised more revelations, more betrayals, and more suspense than anyone could have foreseen. In that frozen moment, where time itself appeared to hesitate, the judge's eyes met those of the doubtful officer one last time. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a silent acknowledgement that the events of this night were merely the prelude to a far more dangerous game. A game in which loyalties would be tested, secrets would be unearthed, and the very definition of justice would be rewritten. With the tension at its peak and the stakes higher than ever, the narrative of this night was left hanging on the precipice of revelation. The air vibrated with anticipation as every individual present felt the heavy burden of what was to come. Would the system finally confront its own failings, or would it continue to shroud the truth behind a veil of orders and silence? And as the clock ticked toward an uncertain future, one thing was clear: this story was far from over. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken tension. The high-ranking official, his face shadowed beneath the streetlights, studied Judge Nathaniel Reeves with a knowing smirk. He had given his order: "Secure the area. No further questioning until my team arrives." The officers stood frozen, caught in a storm of conflicting emotions. They had been moments away from escalating an arrest, and now the truth sat like a loaded gun between them. Judge Reeves wasn't just any man. He was a man of the law, a man they could no longer control. But there was something else, a deeper game at play. The official's words carried a weight beyond a routine stop. Reeves could see it in his eyes, the confidence of someone who knew more than he let on. Behind him, the shadowed figure, the one who had been watching, stepped forward. His presence sent a ripple through the group. One officer reached for his holster, another tensed his jaw. Reeves turned, locking eyes with the man. "You still don't see it, do you?" the figure said, his voice low. "This was never just about you." And then, everything changed. A black SUV skidded to a stop at the curb. Its tinted windows reflected the chaos of flashing lights. The back door swung open, and from the darkness, a man stepped out. Tall, poised, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit. A diplomatic badge gleamed in his hand. The diplomat. The high-ranking official stiffened, his smirk vanishing. The officers exchanged uncertain glances, sensing the shift in power. The diplomat's presence meant one thing. This situation had spiraled into something much bigger than a traffic stop. Without hesitation, the diplomat strode toward Reeves, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. He exuded control, his face unreadable. "Judge," he said smoothly, nodding in acknowledgement. "You've caused quite a stir." Reeves held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "And who exactly are you?" The diplomat gave a knowing smile. "Someone trying to clean up this mess before it gets out of hand." He turned to the high-ranking official. "Let the judge go." A beat of silence. Then the official's mask cracked. "You don't give me orders." "No," the diplomat agreed. "But you don't want me calling the people who do." A cold wind passed between them, carrying the weight of unspoken threats. Finally, the official stepped back, jaw tight. "Stand down," he ordered the officers. But before Reeves could take a breath of relief, the diplomat leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. "You need to leave. Now." Reeves narrowed his eyes. "Why? What aren't you telling me?" The diplomat's expression darkened. "Because this isn't about a traffic stop. It never was. And if you stay, they will bury you." Something sharp twisted in Reeves's stomach. He wasn't a fool. He knew when power was shifting in the shadows. He had spent his life ruling on cases where corruption lurked just beneath the surface. But now, he wasn't just presiding over the system. He was inside it. He glanced at the officers, still tense, still watching him like a problem they didn't know how to solve. The high-ranking official was already on his radio, murmuring something low and dangerous. Reeves turned to leave, but then he stopped. Something wasn't right. A single thought hit him like a lightning bolt. Why had there been 3 patrol cars for a suspicious person walking home? Why had they called in backup before even knowing who he was? This wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. His pulse quickened. He turned sharply to the diplomat. "This was planned, wasn't it?" The diplomat hesitated, just enough for Reeves to know the truth. Before the diplomat could respond, the shadowed figure, the man who had been watching from the sidelines, finally spoke. "They needed you scared," he said quietly. "They needed you rattled. That's why they stopped you. They wanted to see how you'd react." Reeves stared at him. "Why?" The shadowed man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Because you've been asking the wrong questions in the right places." A chill shot down Reeves's spine. The cases he had been ruling on recently, the ones tied to corporate fraud, political cover-ups, government overreach, he had suspected something deeper, but nothing concrete. Until now. The high-ranking official's radio crackled. "New orders," a voice said through the static. "Take him in." The words were a gunshot in the night. Officers tensed. Hands went to holsters. Reeves took a step back, his heart slamming against his ribs. "You said to let me go." The diplomat's expression was grim. "I was wrong." The high-ranking official smirked. "Judge Reeves," he said mockingly, "you're under arrest." "For what?" Silence. They didn't have a charge. They didn't need one. The high-ranking official nodded at his men. "Take him!" The first officer lunged. And then the world erupted. The shadowed figure moved first, yanking Reeves back just as a gun was drawn. The diplomat cursed, stepping in front of Reeves as chaos broke loose. Officers shouted, hands flew, radios blared. The street became a war zone of conflicting orders, weapons flashing in the streetlights. And then, a gunshot. A single deafening crack split the air. A body hit the ground. The high-ranking official gasped, clutching his shoulder. His own officer had fired, mistaking movement in the chaos. For a split second, no one moved. Then the diplomat seized the moment. "Enough!" he roared, his voice carrying above the madness. Everyone froze. The high-ranking official, face pale with pain, spat blood. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. The diplomat turned to Reeves, voice tight. "Run!" "What?" "Now." Reeves hesitated, but then he saw it, the flicker of movement. More SUVs pulling in, unmarked, untraceable, the kind of response sent when a cover-up had to happen. His breath caught. This wasn't about him being arrested. This was about making sure he never made it to morning. The shadowed man grabbed his arm. "Judge, move!" Reeves ran. His feet pounded against the pavement, his heart a sledgehammer in his chest. Behind him, voices shouted, tires screeched, but he didn't look back. He ran until the streets blurred, until the city swallowed him whole. The last thing he heard before disappearing into the night was the diplomat's voice, sharp and urgent. "We're out of time." And then, darkness. But Reeves knew one thing. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning.